Hello and welcome, everyone. We're really glad to have you here today for the next iteration in our 6-session series, Day 1 and Beyond, which will take you through a series of topics and activities related to building out on Oracle Cloud. For those of you who may be new to our events, we're hosted on Cloud Customer Connect, which is our Oracle Community Forum for end users. I'll be sharing some links and resources throughout this presentation today that will lead you back to those CCC forums. And if you're not already a member, we invite you to create a free account, join in discussions, look for upcoming events on all kinds of topics. My name is Kenna Kettrick. I'm a program manager with the OCI Go-to-Market team. And today I'm joined by Larry Beausoleil, Cloud Engineering Senior Enablement Manager, and Jeremy Walker, Master Principal Cloud Architect. And today they're going to be focusing on a deep dive into tenancy operations on OCI. So go ahead and take it away, Larry and Jeremy. It's all yours.
Awesome. Thanks, Kenna. Well, welcome back, everybody, to our Day 1 and Beyond series with our tenancy operation deep dive. I think this is an exciting topic. You know, this is something that we wanted to do a continuation of some of the other series. So if you look at the last week's series or last week's recording, or if you were there with Uma and Brandon, who talked about business operations and governance, you know, this is a continuation on that particular topic, but we're going to dive into some more interesting components of the tenancy. So if you don't know who I am, I'm Larry Beausoleil, and I'm joined here today with Jeremy. Jeremy, are you excited for this topic? I know I am.
I am. I really am, because it is something that it's core to the models, to the framework of working within OCI. It's something that can be super simple to explain, but also it has so many nuances and tips and tricks that we hopefully are going to go into that make it just more secure, more comfortable, and hopefully more intuitive, developing out and fleshing out your OCI topography, your OCI existence, if you will.
Definitely. All right, so our agenda is kind of interesting today, and for the advanced series, it's going to be an interesting journey, because this is something that our goal was to shorten our slide deck, was the first goal. The second goal is to get you as much information as possible. So what we're going to do today is we have 3 links that we're going to cover. Once we get through a couple slides here, then we're going to pop into these links, and then we're also going to be popping into the console to really show you what's going on in the console and why we went with this approach. First one is going to be reviewing best practices. You know, you may be advanced engineers or you may be brand new and just wanted to get a little bit deeper understanding, but this is something that we all can agree upon. You know, foundations are crucial. You know, having a solid foundation, especially when you're building out a new account, is key. Then we're going to get into like a high-level compartment structure, and this is something that we do have kind of a design and architecture I'm going to show you in the slides here shortly. And then we're going to get into a real world compartment structure. Words are hard this morning, but we're going to get into a couple different architectures, and we're also Jeremy has spent a lot of time building this out in the console so we can actually go through it with you. Jeremy, any points you want to add on this, or do we want to just kind of keep pressing forward to get to the fun part?
No, we can move forward, but just as we go, this is really meant to kind of build on itself. Like you said, we want to touch on the best practices, because the compartment structure, the tenancy structure, really is the bedrock, the foundation for establishing that correct trajectory. If you want to end up where you want to be, you need to head off in the right direction. And so the right direction, starting down the right path, is establishing that correct framework, the correct policies and procedures around your compartment strategy, your tenancy management strategy. And so that's kind of what we're going through. Hopefully, you know, you get that as we ascend through the complexity and through this conversation. If there is any questions, like I said, that's what the Q&A panel's for. We'll be going into the console. We'll be going into the details of it. If we skip anything, or if there's any clarifications that need to be made, please let us know as we're going through this.
Definitely. Yeah, because this is definitely for all you that joined. All right. So if you've joined us before, you've probably seen this slide, or if you joined some webinars from Oracle, you've probably seen this slide. But just something that we like to cover is the fact that we do have kind of a full stack offering. So this is something that when you're starting out, it's like, can Oracle do it? We look at this and we do have developer services, we have application services. If you want to have security on your tenancy, we did a phenomenal deep dive talk on that about zero trust security. So there's a lot of different things and different components that you can actually get into when you're building out your tenancy. As we build this out, this is something that we want to consider. Whose responsibility is what when you're building out your tenancy. And I know that this may seem like a foundational item, but this is something to consider at every level when you launch something, when you design it, when you configure it. What do you need to take care of? Now, when you transition, Jeremy, go ahead.
I was going to say, and go along with this, as you ascend, we talk about SaaS and the Oracle products that go along with that, and the same thing with PaaS, with our managed services and offerings. As we're talking about the tenancy, the constructs of these compartments, the policies incorporated with them, that follows in this IaaS pillar here. So there's the reason that we're going through this, the reason that we say this is core and important is because this is the responsibility of the customer, of you guys, to make sure that this is correct. Now we're there. That's why we're here. Larry and I are here talking. You have your support team that's there to help you set this up when needed. But ultimately, that's part of the starting block, the building block of establishing your cloud structure. Again, your cloud topography is you building out the structure and making sure that the configuration is correct, that you don't have those events that get you on the front page of the New York Times. That's why this is important. That's why we have all these tools that we're going to talk through. That's why there's so many checks and balances, is to make sure that bedrock is solid with your environments.
Yeah, definitely, because it's something that when we look at these environments, once we step away from the shared responsibility, it's where we're building it. It's do I need to have multiple tenancies? And that's something that we're going to kind of answer that question today. Do I need to have multiple tenancies? How do I structure this so that I make sure that, if I want to build an Ashburn and Phoenix, can I build that in the same account correctly? Or what's going on with all of these locations I can build in? And we're not going to highlight the governance piece of it, but something just to keep in mind on governance is, can you build in that location? And so that will pop in your mind when you start building out your tenancy, because do I need to lock down where things are happening? So if I want to build in, let's say, Phoenix or Ashburn, but I don't want anyone to build in Toronto, how do I structure, my tenancy? So I'm going to hand this one over to you, Jeremy, because this is something that tenancy and compartments, what are they? Why do I care? How's it going to help me today?
Yeah, and this kind of goes into that. You have what you just showed. There's this huge footprint available to build out an OCI across the planet. I'm betting in a few years we're going to have some data centers on Mars and on the moon, so we're going to have to extend that map a little bit, and I'm looking forward to it. But for right now, we're looking at terra firma right now. But with that, you mentioned something. Where do we allow that access? One of the great things that the features that we have is the ability to do exactly that. Limit where your resources are deployed, which region, which area, which geographic location you can, so that you have purview to what is being created and where it's being done, and you don't have to basically scan that entire planet every single time you're looking for resources or having to manage it. How you do that? What are the tools incorporated with that? Well, that's where your tenancy and your compartment structure comes into play. Starting at this super high level, if you were with us in the first run through with the day one and beyond, Then we did kind of touch this a little bit on, what is the compartments, what is the tenancy, how does it differ? But just as a quick review so that everybody's on the same page, most of you, I'm guessing, have a familiarity, or at least a passing knowledge of what a public cloud infrastructure at its surface looks like. Well, you have your accounts, you have, you log into this public interface, and the majority of the market it looks one way. You have your account, and for each one of your development teams, each one of your organizational teams or OUs, organizational units, you give them an account, and then they have to manage it, and then you have to build a structure either using that cloud provider's tools or using external tools to manage all of those accounts, manage the permissions, the billings across all of that structure. I know with AWS in particular, you have the multi-account strategy, which is there's a lot of documentation about. Now with Oracle, we chose to look at it from an enterprise point of view. There's enterprises are large, enterprises consist of many, many teams. We didn't think that you needed to create a bunch of accounts, have to manage all of those accounts just to get your separation of duties and responsibilities, your data segmentation, those common requirements within a enterprise. You didn't have to have all these separate constructs in the cloud. So we created a tenancy, which is intended to cover an enterprise. There are exceptions where you can talk me out of having multiple tenancies, but in general, most enterprises can fall within a single tenancy. And then your compartments themselves are your dividing, your deviation tool. You create your compartments for your development teams, for your environments. They cascade down, so you can have nested compartments. So you can have a development team in a compartment, and we'll go into this a little bit later, but then within that compartment, you can have different environments for that team. So your dev, test, and prod. So what you may be familiar with is that account structure that has its IAM, its access management, all its billing, its quota that you have to manage at that account level. Well, within Oracle, the tenancy has the governing authority over these compartments. So you can set your quotas, set your limits, set budget, and also your security standards. But then within each compartment, it inherits those policies and procedures from your tenancy automatically. But then also you can delegate what security, what permissions you want within that compartment. So if you want that compartment to be able to have certain permissions to delegate to those nested compartments within that organization, you can do that. But then that still falls under the purview, under the control of that tenancy. So it's never completely out of your control. You have that single pane of glass to look across your entire organization and have that control. And then if you need to divide it up, if you need to add more, if you need to remove, those capabilities are all nested in there. So you can expand and contract as your enterprise does, and as your services needs to, as you would want your public cloud to be able to do. So it's just a different way of looking at it. So hopefully that, again, we're going to kind of show you in more detail what that looks like. But that's, again, a quick overview of how that looks from that 10,000 foot view. Larry, did that make sense? I kind of went through there with a broad brush, but I want to make sure I touched everything.
Yeah, I think the two things to highlight is, well, actually one point to highlight is a tenancy can have the nomenclature of a compartment. So just something to keep in mind when you start building out your account is your root tenancy is also a compartment, and then it has compartments within compartments. It's almost Inception at some point when you have so many compartments possible, but it allows that scalability that you need, especially when you have multiple organizations. And this is where, like you're saying, we're going to get into it, Jeremy, because we have our root tenancy here, we have our root compartment, and then we have our different organizational units at our company. And one of the things that I've seen when I talk to customers ask me, why do I care about compartments? Why am I doing this? And, some customers are like, well, I build out stuff for customers. I'm like, perfect. You can use a compartment and have that customer's construct applications and everything in that particular compartment and have your policies associated with it. Or you have your internal organizations and internal teams inside of those compartments. Now, I want to put a wild disclaimer. It does depend, because I have seen customers that have multiple tenancies, and Jeremy, you've probably seen that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's something that it can happen. It is a very much, it depends on what you're trying to do, what problem you're trying to solve, as to the specific way we recommend. Now, for general purpose and the vast majority of customers, one tenancy with multiple compartments that are structured in a way that we have a shared compartment. We have, as you see here, we have our HR compartment, we have our sales compartment, we'll probably have our developer compartment. And each one of these, I'm gonna grab the annotation piece here if I can find it. So inside of this particular design here, we can have different layers of policies. And this is something that we're going to show you inside of the account. But we'll have our sales admin that has access to all of these subcompartments that we see here. But they also have access to the root compartment here. So it's something that the sales prod admin only has access to that particular compartment and does not have access to the top level compartment. So this is something where you can get very granular in your setup of your tenancy and your policies of, in this case, I only want Jeremy to have access to, let's say, the HR test. So I could put him in a group that has access to HR test, but I need someone as an admin to kind of to administer the compartment and give access to the appropriate individuals. But I don't want this person or this team to have access to the rest of the resources. So the compartment structure is going to give us a logical isolation of our resources. Jeremy,
yeah, and
what's your thoughts?
Particular one here, and there's a link to and Ken, if you can throw that out there to this particular workshop. This example has some code behind it that you can actually run and show how this is built out, the differentiations between it. And this is one that's fairly simply laid out. You have a 3-tier structure between your root and then different compartments within it. There's resources in those compartments, and it shows how you can have specific groups and users that only have access to the resources within the compartments that they're assigned to. And again, displaying that hierarchy that Larry displayed here. I know we wanted to jump out. Larry, do you want to jump out to that best practices, and we can go to how this builds into the personas and who's in charge of what, and how that builds out to actually practical explanations of implementing this and implementing these segmentations.
Yeah, and it's perfect timing, because we got a question on around this basic topic, like how do we divide up our production and non-production users. So this is something that kind of our best practices and recommendations on how to do so. You don't have to have multiple identity controllers or domain access or anything like that. This falls under like their function, their job function, and inside of our best practices, we look at the persona, who needs access to what, and then what we can do inside of our account, we can actually create different groups that are going to give each individual the appropriate access. So Jeremy, your background's DevOps. My background is infrastructure. So there's going to be a little overlap of what I need access to. So I need access to the networking, the core compute, basically building everything out. And then Jeremy, what do you need access to? Because that's something that I build the system, and then I hand it over to you.
Yeah, and that's in DevOps years ago. I know it's a buzzword that's not new anymore, but it did throw kind of a wrench in that that system of silos that was established for years. Is so, like you said, with infrastructure, you have that need to know, the underpinnings, what's going on, the alerting, the building, the establishment of those resources, and DevOps needs part of that to be able to see and manage and monitor and deploy, but also it needs to extend into the application layer. And so that's where the compartment structure and the policies within that really lend itself good to that one size doesn't necessarily fit all model. And here in our best practices, we call out, like it shows here, security, resiliency, performance, operational. How do we achieve that when you do have Larry working on, one piece, needs to see and have access to it to do his job for the infrastructure and maintaining that reliability and maintaining that performance of the whole environment. But then you have me, I've got to be able to see it, but I don't necessarily be able to break any. I don't want to break anything. I don't want to be called on the carpet, but I do want the permissions I need to make sure I can do my job. And so when we have these best practices laid out, and Oracle says, you need to make sure you're fault tolerant. You need to make sure that you have right sizing and you have the monitoring and auditability in place. How do we make sure that everyone has access to the things they need, that there's that separation of duties, both, like you said, logical and also demonstratable in auditable, so that everyone is happy. This document here has a lot of, and I would suggest, everyone needs to take a look at this. I don't know if there's anything mind-blowing about a lot of it. Hopefully it's usable, but it is these concepts of who needs to be involved with these decisions, at what point they need to be involved. And again, that whole, where do you want to be when you're operating, when you're running in the cloud? And this is your goal. This is your target. You may ask, how does tenancies and compartments fit with this? Well, this is your launch pad. Tenancy and compartment policy is your launch pad. And I think I said this the other day when we on session, but there's a great quote. Don't know who said it, but if you're off by just a little bit at the launch pass and you're aiming for Mars, you're going to be off by a ton by the time you get there. But if you're heading in the general right direction from launch, it's a lot easier to fine tune when you get closer to Mars if you're heading in the right direction from the get-go. So you want to be headed as close to on target from the get-go, so you don't have to make quite as drastic changes later on. And so how do we achieve this? How do we get to this pie in the sky view that we are secure, that we're reliable, that we have high availability, and that we our CFO is happy with the bill that he gets at the end of the month? I think that's what we're all looking for here.
Yeah, and there's so many different things. So if you joined us on the day one and beyond business and governance, we started talking about tagging, and that's gonna help us in what we're doing today, because we want to, if I want Jeremy to access certain things, I can tag it as prod, non-prod, and then I can create a policy around that. So that gives us that extra level of security and granularity. And when we get into the policy structure inside of the tenancy, if you created a policy, you'll probably notice that OCI doesn't have a deny statement in its policy structure. And that's done for a reason. The reason we have our policies stated the way it is everything is deny until you allow access. And to scope it down to what a developer needs versus a sysadmin versus anybody else needs, and the policies can, like we talked about, be at the different compartment levels. You can actually do conditional statements and a not equals. So that way you can scope down what they actually have access to for the APIs. And Jeremy, you were talking about something that's like, we need this auditable. We need to be able to, if we have a security event, we get an audit, how do we pull those logs of who did what at what time and acted upon what resources, or what service acted upon what resource? Because this is something that, as we get into our structure here, it may not be human interaction. It may be an instance pulling something from object storage. It may be an API call happening because of a function, because of another trigger that happened inside the account. So how do we account for all of those pieces when we're building out our compartment structure? So
right.
I'm going to pause this for a second because we do have an open question here. So how do we handle ADFS integration, and is there an ADFS prod instance and test instance with personas? So for ADFS, this is something that we do have federated services. There is a way to integrate Active Directory federated services into OCI. And Jeremy, when you share the console, I'll have you pop into that real quick to show it. There's not so much a prod and test instance with personas per se. Jeremy, what's your piece on that? Because that's something that if you're looking for access specifics, it's this person has policy. If you're trying to test what person has access to, I have to dig into that one a little bit more to see if we have like basically a dry run scenario for what a person has access to.
Yeah, going back to the DevOps answer would be, yeah, your dev test production permissions at the user level, at your persona level, would all be in your prod ADFS instance. Now, if you want to test, you would have a test instance of ADFS, I would think. And again, this is, I'm making some assumptions. There's 5,000 different ways that this can be implemented, but you would have that test instance to test permissions before they would go live. If you have like a new policy wave being implemented across groups, if you have if you have a new group that you're testing the production permissions for, if you're about to make a large change, you would want to test that in a test instance of ADFS on your test environment with test permissions before you've made that change in production. So I don't know if that answers that question completely. But if you're talking about like the personas for test, dev, and test and prod, typically you would see those still implemented in your production ADFS, pointed to that tenancy or integrated with that tenancy. Now we do have something coming in. I should know a better timeline on this, because we did have these integrations down at we're rolling out that single sign-on and group management at the compartment level now. And we were rolling that out. I think we're rolling that out as we speak with existing accounts, and you should be able to have access to that with new accounts fairly shortly. But it would give you that granular access to managing those personas, those groups at the compartment level, and so that there is no view. You wouldn't log in through the tenancy. You wouldn't come into the root and then be channeled down to your compartment. You'd actually come directly into the compartment, and you would have that more granularity at the federation level. I don't know where that is right now. I can look that up, and we can get back maybe in a lull. But I know that's how I would do it. That's how I've seen it.
Yeah, we'll definitely come back to that. All right, let's hop into what this looks like. So I'm going to quickly show this, and then we're going to pop into the console for this piece here. So isolate multi-tier cross-regional development environments by using compartments. So we're going to say that 5 times fast, and then it'll be done, right? So this is the architecture that we showed you inside the slide deck. This is something that there's a few pieces of breakdown and architectural components here. So you have your tenancy. So now we all know what a tenancy is. We have our region, and if you've joined us in the past, you know what a region is. It's a logical geographical location made up of multiple availability domains. And then we have our compartments and policies. And in this case, we have a load balancer, compute. So there's a few different things that are actually done in this particular architecture. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to hand it over to Jeremy to share his screen so that we can actually pop into the console and show you what's going on in there.
There we go. And hopefully you're seeing my console. Yeah. So let this implementation that Larry was just showing is a high level, like I said, it's a simplistic layout of how compartments can be implemented. We're in that kind of cascading fashion where you have, again, that encapsulating compartment, as we call it, with HR. And then in this example, you have a prod, staging, dev. The question regarding dev, test, and prod. This is again a simplistic view of how you would lay this out, where you would say anyone assigned to this group would have access to these resources. Anyone assigned to this group, the HR staging, would have access to this resources. So to go back to the example of infrastructure, DevOps, those persona differentiations, your application developers would probably be added to this dev admin so that they could deploy and monitor and play around in this dev and test area. As you get to staging and prod, they wouldn't be in those groups. Your automation tools would have access to these resources, and obviously prod, you'd have little to no access. Your infrastructure team, your security team may have access to these resources, and that would be it. So you would have those differentiations. Again, high level pass. Now in a whole separate compartment, you would have these permissions, these resources completely separated out. How that looks, just to go over here and look. Now I built out the next one, which is a little more complex, but to give you an idea of what we're not console, compartments. When you lay out your compartments in your console, this is simply what it looks like. You have your root compartment, that's me, Jeremy Walker, and you have your subcompartments under it. Now this is kind of a flat, I'll go into the CIS, that's where I built out the better, I say the more practical landing zone, as we'll call it. But if we're looking just at, let's say, the managed compartment, if we go into these policies here, we'll see that there's just kind of wide sweeping my screen's not big enough.
I just click on the root for a second, Jeremy. Yeah, so this is one thing you'll notice here when we're looking at policies is the policies at the root versus policies at the sub level. This is something that you have to, you're creating at the initial. Where is this policy going to apply? What compartment level is it going to apply at? So.
Yep. Yeah, and so exactly. And so what inside of that, and if you're, let's just say IAM policy, if you're not familiar with the way that these policies are written, they're written to allow this group, kind of just read it and it makes sense. Allow this group to inspect, which means is another word for view, inspect users within the entire tenancy. That's across the whole tenancy, including all the subcompartments. That's your IAM for your IAM admins. If I want to be more granular and look at, what, let's say, security might have been about, because it's probably got all the all access. But if I go down to, let's say, at dev, where is I might have drilled down.
And one thing to make it easier to find these things is tagging policies, and the fact that every single one of these pieces has an OCID on it. So if you tag it and you look for your OCID, you're like, okay, this is a prod piece. I'm looking for this piece. I can search with the OCID. Compartments. One of the things while Jeremy's looking for this, our compartments are a global construct. So that's something to keep in mind as you deploy them. It's not isolated to a specific region until you put a policy around it to isolate it to that region, essentially.
Yep. And so, yeah, this draws a different, like he said, if you have it at your root level, then you're typically at that tenancy. As you go down to that compartment level, you can get more fine-grained Whereas this app dev Walker, I'm a little bit narcissistic that way. Walker app dev admin policy, you're limited to that. I'm now given access to all resources in app dev. Now I'm cheating a little bit, but I'm going to show you. You can also grant, let's see here. I have read access to the network compartment. I don't have access, but it's that shows you how there's resources in another compartment that I will have access to. Now I want to, like I said, you look at this as kind of that simple layout. I'm going to cheat ahead a little bit and go to.
Yeah, let's dive into the advanced one of how you have it laid out.
This is exactly. So this is our CIS foundations. This is what we suggest starting with when you're building out your first landing zone. This has been vetted. It's got a lot of bells and whistles. It's more, let's see if I can get this. Actually, I think I can zoom in a little bit using that. Yeah, here we go. So what this builds out is a more complex, what you would see in a practical enterprise environment. You have this this is what we'd call our root folder, this encapsulating compartment, a root compartment. And it's going to hold the VCN, some of these, the network resources, subnets. It's going to have the data VCN as well. It's going to have all the network components. Now, you want other individuals, other teams to have access to these components, but maybe not to be able to own them, destroy them, manipulate them. So you have perhaps an app development team, and I will go into how this is actually laid out. But you have these other compartments that hold resources that these specific compartment owners, individuals, teams, organizations, their resources will rest in it. So the example I'm going to go into a little bit is, okay, object storage buckets, compute functions, managed services like the Kubernetes, OKE, the Kubernetes managed service that we have. They can be in another compartment, but obviously they can't live on their own without resources from the network team, from the network layer. And so you're going to see the ability to have resources that a compartment owns, a user group owns, that rely on resources from another compartment, even though the two compartments don't have dominion over each other. You're able to get fine-grained so that you don't have to have full control over everything just to be able to use it. And so even at the visibility layer. So this is something, again, we can share the details on this, and you can actually build this out. I was able to build this out in a free tier account. This is my account. So you can see and implement and play around with this code. I say play around with this code. We actually provided in a Terraform script, and you can download and tweak. It's got some pretty good documentation on how to actually implement it. And this is exactly what I went by. So if I go into what this actually built out, I can see that if I go into networking and I look at my VCNs, it should open me up in this CIS. So this is my root compartment for this particular build out. You see these other compartments that it created. My VCN is not in this root compartment. My VCN is actually, those resources are owned in this network compartment. This network compartment holds the VCN, all the resources within it. If we go into this, you can see this is the compartment it's in. And so you have a network team, the infrastructure team that Larry's on, can build out all the infrastructure they need to within their own dedicated compartment with their permissions and the resources they need, without having to be involved in another team's resources, without having to integrate directly or having dependencies necessarily on their timeline and their permissions. You don't have to ask permission to build into their account or build into their environments. You build it, and then you grant which teams are allowed to utilize the resources that you're creating. Perfect example here is, I mentioned, hey, I have an application team. I have an application team that needs to, let's say, build out a new environment. Well, let me go to a user. I created a user prior. that I'm going to call app user. So app user is exactly that. He's an application user, and he is a member of the app dev admin group. Now, let's say I'm a member of that. When you build all of this out, when you let me go back to this. When you build all this out, it creates these. It creates these user groups as well that have the permissions that are assigned here that allow them the already pre-configured permissions that allow them. Hey, it knows they need network resources. It knows it needs log and scanning, and it knows it needs visibility into those logs. It knows it needs access back to database resources. And so it has those pre-built in. Going back to this is where it says it knows it needs to build out these stacks within the app dev, but also I need, let's see, where was it? Network resources. I need to be able to actually see, I need to build out a NIC and attach it. I need to build out security groups. These are things that I can use. I can't create new ones. I can't break the ones or delete the ones that are already there, but I can use the ones that have been created for me. We can test that. I love trying to break something. But if we go, let me switch to, sorry about that. I'm trying to switch over to this. There we go. New account. So this is where I'm actually logged in as this application user. So let's see, queries to find certain resource. To answer that, is it difficult to find OCI? There's a question about OCI queries to find resources. No, so the compartments are just IDs. If you have permission to see those resources just the way we're doing in this console. So I'm logged in as app user here. Behind the scenes is obviously these CLI commands doing this. Similarly, if I'm looking at, let's say, permissions, if I don't have permissions to see it, then I'm going to get this alteration not found. If I can, again, I had that use in that view for networking resources. If I go in networking, I can obviously see these network resources. But if I want to go in and say, I don't like these subnets, I want to create another subnet. And I'm going to create a CIDR block of, we'll say 10.0.8. So we'll say 24. And public, everything stays the same. And I go to create. This should, there you go. I can't create these resources, but hey, I'm a developer. I need to create my instance, or I need to create my function. I need to attach to these networks. Well, I have just the permissions I need. Where, okay, let me create this instance. All right, so network, I can't create it in a network, but I do have my compartment that I can create it in. This is cheating again. I created one beforehand, but this will show. If I leave this default, it's going to try to create a new VCN with my resource in my compartment. If I try to do that, yeah, I don't care. It's not going to let me because I don't have permissions to create a virtual cloud network, which I don't have any business creating my own network. That's going to cost money, and it's not going to be monitored by my ops team. It's not going to be monitored by my security team, but I can select one that's been created for me in the network VCN. There's the network VCN. Looks like existing subnet. I don't have one in my compartment, but there is one in the network compartment. And we're going to go there.
And the policies around this allow you to put your resources pretty much in any compartment or structure that you deem is kind of correct, so to speak, for your build out. So as you see here, like the policy to, when you're creating the instance, that's created in, the app dev compartment. So Jeremy may have the, as a tenancy admin, I may give Jeremy access to create a specific resource, but I can lock down what resources he can and can't create inside of that compartment. And I can lock down, he'll have visibility to see the networks so that that's created in, like you see here, it's created in the appropriate network, but he can't create a new VCN. So this is something that as you're building this out, you're putting in, I don't want to say gates, but it's gates really to protect your account, protect what's going on, and make sure that you're able to access or give access to those particular resources. And so this is like the compartment piece and the tenancy piece are the basics of it. Is this is the logical isolation of your resources. The complexity to this and what makes this something that we wanted to go through and kind of wanted to show you the architectures is the fact that you have multiple personas at a company. I get asked this question all the time is, are the personas that I have for on-prem going to translate into cloud? Yes, they are. You need a network administrator. You need a system administrator. You need an operations person. You need your database person. You need all of that. The only difference is you're not racking and stacking. You're not going into that. Now, how do I create these constructs inside of the tenancy? And as Jeremy is kind of demonstrating here, he has created different personas. So we still have those personas, still have those policies of what can and can't be created. And then each one of these can be tagged. Every single one of these, we can actually run an audit. Essentially, we can go into the audit logs and see who did what at what time, where it was. I know that there was a question on querying from the CLI. So it's something that you can query what's happening inside the account. There is a little finessing the syntax of what you're querying or where you're pulling it from. So that's something that send some information and put it on this video. But Jeremy, would you mind going back to the compartments and kind of the policy area on this one?
Okay.
So like this user here, no, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, so this user here, some of the things to note and like its capabilities as we build out the tenancy, this user may not have access to actually build out another compartment. And that's, and it's because every user, we're not assigning individual permissions or policies. We're making sure that that's done at the group level. So now, if we chase down this app dev admin group, let's pop into this. And if we use the OCID, this is something that the OCIDs are structured in a way that it'll actually show you, where, what region it's in, basically. So if you drop that OCID that you copied at the top in the search bar there, Jeremy.
Copy it.
I thought you did.
I thought I did, and then I didn't. We can do this, copy it, and then search bar. There we go.
So inside of this, the user is a global construct. And then if we actually go to the policy that's associated with, or that group that's associated with that user, the group is going to be a global construct. So you can search in any region. This is something that if you're trying to search for certain resources, you'll notice with the OCID, or you may notice that as you're searching that you're not finding it. And it's like, why can't I find it? Certain things are going to have a specific region nomenclature in the OCID, and you have to query against that region basically, or have it cycle through the regions to find where it's at. So that's something that there is a search tool, an advanced search tool that can kind of give you a here's what's going on. Normally what I recommend when people are trying to search for things is you actually search for the compartment first, because the compartment will actually give you general resources globally, even if you can't access those resources from that region. But you'll notice this instance that Jeremy has up here has IAD in it. So that means that this resource is actually housed in US East, in Ashburn. So this is something that if I want to search for it, I need to be in that region. So certain things, just knowing like if it's a global construct or if it's a region specific construct will help when you're building this out. This also helps when it comes to the policies that we create. So if we pop into policies real quick, you'll notice that we have the compartment structure for the policies, and then we have these specific policies. Now, inside of these policies, I think there was one that you had earlier, Jeremy, that had some condition statements on it that was not equal to admin.
Find those.
Yeah. And you'll notice that all of these are groups. Yeah, so we have a condition statement here. So target group name not equal to administrators, target group name not equal to cred admin group. So this is something that, what I was talking about earlier, like when we're doing our tenancy creation, we have to have a user in the admin group. There has to be one user always in the admin group, but we don't want everybody to have that permission level, basically unlimited access. It's it's nice to have because you're just like, you know what, I'm in Linux, sudo SEO, just give me all the power. But we want to be more granular with what we're doing. And so this condition statement is basically the way you can do a deny and get more granular. And then you can also go down to like the allow group, Walker IAM admin group to manage identity providers. So this is another piece of we're giving access to a piece of the pie. We're not giving access to the entire pie. All right,
exactly.
So
and this is the other piece where these conditions can also include tagging, because that's where we go into that, where you can say where if certain resources are tagged as a certain thing, you want certain groups to be able to have access to certain instances, maybe in the same compartment, but only if they are tagged with test, or only if they're tagged with a certain payer ID or something like, or a characteristic like that. So it does give you even that finer grain of control to allow those permissions to resources based on that level of denotation.
Yeah. So one of the other questions here, and we're getting dangerously close to time. So this will, if there are any other questions, pop them in real quick. So can we have groups of users in the same compartment, one group log in with SSO and another with standard login? It's a yes with an asterisk. There is a way to do so because I do have an account that is set up that way.
And that's the way I have this as well. So this is a federated account and these are local accounts. So you can, and it's just the other side of this, the group management on the other side of this is what you just need to be aware of and consistent with, because there is group mapping available, and you have finer control over these, and then the group mapping as well for that federation.
I would, and the reason I add the asterisk is I don't know if I entirely recommend doing that direction, and the reason is if you're going to use the identity cloud service, or if you're doing federation or single sign-on, there's certain level of permissions or capabilities when you start using IDCS here that give you a lot of capabilities. So you like if you want to enforce if you want to enforce radius auth, if you want to enforce MFA or certain other things, there's something that you can start enforcing with those tools, with IDCS and some of the other ones. But if you're not concerned about that side of it, you're just starting in the tenancy and playing around, I can understand the having it split. Just make sure you have groups and policies in place for those particular users. But awesome. So these 3 links we sent out. We do have the brief slide deck that you all saw. But this is something that we're going to have more of these advanced talks and more of these conversations and diving into these particular areas. And at any time, you have questions, comments, concerns, or mass panics, as I like to say, let us know, send us something, and we will do our best to get back to you and help you out with that. Jeremy, this has been fun. I'm going to hand it over to you.
I didn't think I was going to feel as rushed, but then it got dense at the end. So I apologize for going over. And if there's any questions, send them, forward them our way. I think our contacts are either in the webinar info. Feel free to ask us questions, and hopefully this has been beneficial.
Yep. Yeah, and looking forward to having you all join us more. We have Brandon and Uma coming back next week with some more on a introductory level topic, and then we'll be back the following week with an advanced topic. So Kenna, I'll let you close us out. Thank you all.
Excellent. That was part of what I was going to say, was to invite folks to come back for that. So thank you for mentioning that. We've got the alternating Tuesdays, Wednesdays for the next several months, and lots of really cool deep dives into specific things. I've just popped up a final poll there for those of you who are still with us. I know we got a little bit over time, but of course, lots to talk about. So I'd love to get some final conclusion answers from you, a little bit of feedback. And I've also shared where the replay and slides will be posted in the chat. And I will post all of the resources that Larry and Jeremy talked about along with that replay as well. So you'll be able to do some deep dives of your own into these links and investigate some of that in the future too. So that is, I think, all from us. We invite you to come back for the future sessions in this series, and have a great day for the rest of your day. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.